Hello, and welcome to Learning Music with Pat. I'm going to start off today by answering a question that somebody asked me recently. You know, I have the idea if somebody asks me a question and doesn't understand something, there's probably a lot more people who have the same question that are not asking. But anyway, this girl asked me, she happened to see me, and she asked me, how do you know, is there a way that you can learn what the names are of the notes above the staff or below the staff in an easy kind of way? So there is an answer, but let me review something with you. If you remember way back when, a few weeks ago, I said there's an easy way to remember the notes on the staff and on the spaces. We're not concerned here so much about the bass clef, we are concerned about the treble clef. And this is E, G, B, D, F. And remember, I told you, if you do remember, the easy way to remember it is to put a sentence to it. E, every, G, good, B, boy, D, does, F, fine, or E, every, G, good, B, boy, deserves, D, deserves, F, fudge. And then it's very convenient, the spaces, F-A-C-E, it spells F-A-C-E. If I'm going to show it to you in this, I've added to the chart E, G, B, D, F. And that leaves the spaces between them in which there's nothing. So this first space would be an F, the second space would be an A, the third space would be a C, and the fourth space would be an E. So basically, and I've got it written down over here as well, so basically that covers the staff from the lowest line of the treble clef to the highest line of the treble clef. But let me review a little bit more because I've added to this. Here's the scale. E, F, G, A, B, C, D, E, F. You have the lowest line, which is the F, and it stops at the highest line, which is also an F. You have all the notes between. Every good boy does fine, F, A, C, E. Now, but there's a lot more notes. You have notes below that F, that E, and it runs down to the C, although it goes further than that, I just didn't put it in. And then when you get up to that F here, you've got G, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C. There's a whole octave of notes, and the piano can even play an octave beyond that. Well, the real question she wanted to know, we say every good boy does fine and face, but then what happens when you get to the C and from anything beyond that F up to that next octave? Is there an easy way to remember what those notes are? They're hard to read because you have ledger lines. There's no easy way to do it, but if you remember that most of the music is in octaves, so therefore it's repeated. So here's your F. You could go back one, and that's your E, E, G, B, D, and F. But beyond that, it's very, very hard to read. There's no easy way to do it. Let me show you a couple of other charts here that I've made up. Every good boy does fine, and then G, A, B, and C. This is your phase. I've got it written out here, E, G, B, D, F, F, A, C, E, and I have it written down, only I've colored in the notes on the spaces, so E, F, G, A, B, C, D, E, F. Now really, you can play a lot of notes. Those notes are repeated in octaves, so let me just switch this here. Okay, here's your C. Now we start off with the E, but the note below is a D, and the note below that is a C, and it has one ledger line. So going up the staff, you go from C to this C to this C, and if I were to continue that on, these are the notes that you would get. If you want to look at some fingering charts, the fingering charts just may be a little hard to see because it's small, but I couldn't make it any larger, it would have run off the page. Here's your C, it has 2 ledger lines. Here's your D, it has 2 ledger lines, but there's a note on top of the ledger line. Here's your E, it has 3 ledger lines, and the note is on the line. And F, you still have those 3, and that note is on top. And then you go to your G, 1, 2, 3, 4, and the note is on the ledger line. And then A, 1, 2, 3, 4, but the note is on top of the ledger line. Same with B. The note is on the ledger line, 1, 2, 3, 4. This is the 5th. And then C, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It would help. There's no simple phrase that you can use to show you what to remember what those high notes are. You need to remember that the recorder can't go above that C anyway, so unless you're playing flute or an instrument like the flute, you wouldn't be getting into these higher notes. But if you can remember that you start off with a ledger line, and actually A starts the first ledger line right here, and there's just 1 line through it. Then you have that repeated with a note above it. Then you have 2 ledger lines, and the note is on it, and then you have 2 ledger lines with a note above it, or really on top of that line. So you have like 1 ledger line, 1 ledger line, 2 ledger lines, 2 ledger lines, but the note is either on the ledger line or right above it. 3 ledger lines, 3 ledger lines, 4 ledger lines, 4 ledger lines. Here the note is through it, here the note is above it. And with that B, you have the 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and you have the note on the ledger line, and then on the C, you have the note above it. So you have like one ledger line for 2 notes, 1 ledger line you just keep on going, 1 ledger line, and there's a note that's used twice. Every ledger line is kind of used twice, one with a note on the line and one with a note above it. So therefore, there it is. Now, in terms of trying to remember it, you can repeat, every good boy does fine. It's like an octave, but you get mixed up because there are so many of those small lines that there's no real easy way to do it. The only thing that you can do it is to learn it as you go. And that's what happens if you're playing flute or you're playing an instrument like the flute. I'm going to try to get this here. Those ledger lines replace drawing them all the way across because it really stands for a line that would normally go all the way across. But if you drew those lines all the way across, your staff would look like this. Here's your E, and here's your C, and it just low C, and it keeps on going, and this would be high C. But with so many ledger lines, or so many lines that go across, a staff with this many lines, you can't read it. It would be almost impossible to read. It's a lot easier to remember that when you're doing C, all right, those are 2 lines, one underneath and one through the note. This is low C. This is a kind of a middle range C. This is a high C, and that's what it's called. It's a high C. It has a ledger line underneath it. It has a ledger line through it. And then this C here, it has the 5 ledger lines. It's called the C above high C. That's what it's called. Now, the piano can do another octave above that, but you can't draw all of that. You'd end up by having like 10 ledger lines. That would be impossible to read. Just like this staff is pretty much impossible to read. So what does a pianist do, or anybody who's writing piano music? If your music is going higher than this high above high C, or C above high C, what they'll do is they'll use the symbol 8VA, When you use the symbol 8VA, it means play it an octave higher than it's written. So they know it's an octave higher than it's written. They know where this is, and they do another octave above that. Other than that, you could have ledger lines through half the page. It would be very, very difficult to read. The only easy way to be able to remember it is just as you're learning how to play, you learn one or two notes at a time, and you get used to seeing them so you know what they look like. If I see 3 ledger lines, I know I'm going to be dealing with an E. If I see 2 ledger lines, I know I'm going to be dealing with a C, and then above it a D, and then it goes to 3 for an E, and you just get to learn it if you're playing an instrument. Because if you're playing an instrument, your teacher will say, okay, this note is an E or an F, whatever it is. This is how you finger it. This is how you play it, and you gradually learn it. And you play it so much that it becomes so familiar to you that when you see it, you know what it is. You just know. But if you're singing, it's a different story because you don't have that background. You know, you're not playing an instrument, you're looking at it and you're singing. I think it's harder to remember when you're singing because with the instruments, you finger the note a certain way. You see the ledger lines, you know it's a high D or a high E or a high F. You know what the fingerings are for it, so you play it with the fingerings, and it just kind of cements itself in your mind so you know. But if you're just looking at it, there's no real easy way. The only way you'd be able to do it is say, okay, this is an A, 1 line. This is a C, 2 lines. This is a D, 2 lines, and the note is above it. And you kind of learn it that way. You learn it as you go. You learn it as you use it. Now, I put in some octaves here just so you could see what we run into when we're playing music. These notes here are the same as these notes here, except they're an octave higher, so you play them. Most of the time, the fingering's going to be similar, but sometimes it's not. Sometimes you have a different fingering for when you play it in a higher register. So this is a D, and this is the high D. This is the E, high E, F, high F, and so far we're on the line. When you get to G, you're starting to get above the staff, but there's no ledger line for that. It's not necessary. When you get to the A, this is a low A, this is an A, 1 ledger line, A. On B, 1 ledger line, but the note is above the ledger line. C, 2 ledger lines, but the note is on the ledger line, so you have 2. Then when you get to D, you have those same 2 ledger lines, but the note is above it. It's just a case of doing it over and over and over. Like, for example, supposing you're learning how to type or something. How do you learn to type? You type, I've taken typing classes, and the way you learn to type is, you just practice it and practice it and practice it, and you see the letter and you strike the key and all of that, and gradually you just learn how to do it. And because practice makes perfect. You see it and then you do it. You see it and then you do it. How do you learn a language? Well, you learn a few words at a time. You don't learn a whole lot of words at a time because you would get too confused. I studied Spanish for 4 years. I love Spanish. I love the language. I even have a Bible. It's just written in Spanish, and sometimes I read it. Now, my Spanish isn't as good as I'd like to have it because I haven't used it for quite a while. But you see the word and you pronounce the word, and you keep doing it. You can do it even with flashcards. And then by the time you get finished and doing it over and over again, it's repetition, is what it is. You see the word, you know what it is, you know how to pronounce it. I remember when I was in college, I had to take a language exam. They're not anymore, I don't think they're required anymore, but to graduate, you had to pass an exam in a foreign language. So I chose Spanish because I liked Spanish. But in order to know enough words, in order to pass a reading exam in Spanish, when all I had was a year or 2 of training in it, I took flashcards, which I bought. They were professionally done. and I memorized words. Look at them, memorize them. How do you pronounce them? How do you read them? What does it mean? And I did that over and over and over again. Throughout one whole summer, I did that. So I would be able, when I got back to college, to pass a reading exam in a language that I normally wouldn't speak. Now I don't think that it's required for you to do so, but you have to have, I think, 2 years of a foreign language in order to get a degree if you're in the liberal arts program, which I was. So it's a case of doing. There isn't, sometimes the only way you can learn something is through repetition. Now, just to let me review this, I don't have to do too much more with these charts. I'd like to get to something else. But here's your middle C, and it's halfway between the upper register and the lower register. I should, if I wanted to make this complete, put a treble clef here and put a bass clef here. It's right in the middle between them. I have 2 stems on it, one in each direction, but the reason is it can be used as a bass clef note, or it can be used as a treble clef note because it's between it. So if you use it as a treble clef note, here I just have the 1 stem, it's the C, and I go up the scale. Here I use it as a bass clef note, and it's right there, and I put the flag down rather than up, but only 1 flag, and I go down the scale. If I'm to show both of them, here's your middle C. I'm using it as a treble clef note. I could use it as a bass clef note. I can use it for both. Here it is with both flags on it, and so therefore I can use it either way. But here I just put it up to the bass, to the treble clef or the bass clef, and there you get all of your notes. And now you can go above the staff and you can go below the staff by a certain amount, but this is bass clef, treble clef. The notes read a little bit differently, but it doesn't matter. For woodwinds, we're just using the upper level clef anyway. So that shows you maybe more of what it's like. Let's see. And on the 2 octave ranges, I have a keyboard here. This C is the same as this on a piano. The D, the same as this on a piano. E is right here. F is right here. G, it's the second line up. It's right here. And then A, B, C, and I follow it all the way up for a 2 octave range. And the recorders, sassotos, penny whistles, some of those more complicated wind instruments are able to play the entire 2 octaves. And that's a lot of notes when you consider. If you go above that, you're repeating them just an octave higher. If you go below that, you're just repeating them an octave lower. So when you stop to think of it, it's not that hard to understand. Now I'm going to stop this. I want to start something else. I had a bunch of charts here. I didn't know how many of them I wanted to use. So we'll stop that. And I want to mention to you that there's a lot of similarities between the woodwind instruments. I'm not speaking in terms of brass. I don't know that much about brass. And I'm not speaking so much about the strings, but there's a lot of similarity. I have about 250 instruments in my collection right now. I cataloged them a few months ago, and I had 231. But I've added since then. Somehow they just seem to come to me. So the instruments that we're focusing on are those that don't have reeds, and that would be the recorders, the penny whistles, the sassotos, the ocarinas, the tonettes, song flutes, flutophones, and recorder-like instruments. Their fingering patterns are very similar, and their mouthpieces are very similar. And the mouthpieces of an instrument are very, very critical because that depends upon how good a sound you get. If your mouthpiece isn't right, it's going to be very difficult to play. Now, I'm going to stop it here because what I'm going to start, what I was hoping I could start today, but I'll do it next segment, is to show you the mouthpieces of instruments that are reeded. In other words, saxophones and clarinets. Now, oboes and bassoons, They have a double reed system. I'm not showing you that, but I'm going to show you the reeds and how the mouthpieces work and the saxophones and the clarinets, and mention maybe about the flute, which is entirely different, and then go on into the similarities and differences of all the non-reeded instruments that I consider to be woodwinds that I call the melody flutes. So we will close it here, and we'll do that next time. We'll start that next time. So please join me next time.